Greetings, fellow gorehounds, and welcome back to a Blood Splattered vlog. I'm the Horror Guru, and today I'm going to talk about Black Christmas 2019. Which, for those of you who don't know, is the second remake of the 1974 classic slasher Black Christmas by director Bob Clark, which is one of the first slashers, if not the first, true slasher film. So, naturally, this movie has some pretty big shoes to fill, which is something I've been saying a lot in my vlogs lately, but it's true. Now, unfortunately, the first go-around with remaking Black Christmas did not go well. It turned out a movie that had some pretty cool, graphically violent kills, but other than that, was kind of by the numbers and really shitty and explained a lot of things that didn't need explaining, and I just didn't like very much. And I know in recent years, the early 2000s Black Christmas has gained somewhat of a cult following, but I am not one of them. I still think that movie really missed the mark. So when I found out that Blumhouse was planning to remake Black Christmas again, I was initially pretty hesitant. I mean, it didn't work the first time around, so why would it work this time? But then two big things happened that made me change my tune towards this movie. The first being, Halloween 2018, which was also a Blumhouse production, turned out to be pretty damn good. I mean, unlike this, it wasn't a remake, it was a sequel, but either way, I enjoyed the hell out of it. Which of course gave me a little more faith that they're going to pour a lot of love and effort into this movie. And the second big thing that happened was they released the official trailer for the movie, which, while it did reveal way too much of the movie ultimately, it still established that this Black Christmas was going to be very different from the previous Black Christmases. Which on one hand is why call it Black Christmas if you're going to do something completely different? But on the other hand, if you're going to do something completely different, then that means you can avoid all the failings of the first remake. Plus, let's be real, some of the best remakes of all time are movies like The Fly, which were completely different movies than their original inspiration. But then I heard something that immediately lowered my expectations, and that's that I found out that the filmmaker and the studio had decided to lower the rating of the movie. Instead of the R-rated movie they shot, they cut it down to PG-13, specifically to target a young teenage female demographic. And while I have no problem with there being horror movies that target that specific demographic, in fact, I feel like there should be way more than there is, I'm not a big fan of taking a movie that was shot as an R movie and then cutting it down to squeeze it into a specific demographic. I feel like that almost always leads to a lesser film in the long run. And yes, while I know there's a huge controversy around that decision, there was a whole bunch of people that immediately piled on the director, and they said some pretty sexist shit in the process of piling on her, but I'm not really interested in getting into that right now. I just want to talk about how I felt about this movie and about the decisions the filmmakers made. Anyway, now that we got all of that backstory bullshit out of the way, I guess the question is now, what did I think of the final film? And the first thing I can definitely say is that this movie is way better than the first remake. Is it as good as the original 1974 classic? No, there's way too many little things that are keeping it down, but I do think it has a lot of potential to have a cult audience much like the first remake as time goes on. So, let's talk about the good things about the movie first. The first thing that 100% works is I love all the characters in this movie. They're all really three-dimensional, even if they have really small parts. There's a lot of little details they pour into these characters that bring them to life in a way that a normal slasher doesn't. And I appreciated that they put that much effort and love into writing these characters. And on top of that, I feel like the dialogue exchanges between the characters is 100% authentic. It feels like real college kids talking in a really outlandish scenario, but like real college kids. And the second thing that I think really works about this movie is it does an amazing job of creating that feeling of being a woman in a situation in which you're surrounded by a bunch of men that you're not sure if you can trust. Even the nice ones have this air of danger around them, and you're not sure which ones are truly nice and which ones are going to pull the rug out from under you. And that's especially important in this movie because this movie deals with the topic of rape and rape culture and dealing with PTSD from being a victim of rape. And so it does a really amazing job of capturing that feeling, kind of in the same way that I understand what it feels like to be a black person in an all-white scenario after seeing Get Out a little better. I understand it a lot more than I did beforehand. And this movie is kind of like that in that way. And the third thing I think actually works about this movie is how unapologetically in your face it is. It is not subtle in the slightest, and it is wearing all its themes on its sleeves. And if you don't understand what the movie's trying to say by the end of it, then that means you just weren't paying attention, because this movie is so clear, it's practically like the Purge movies in that way. And I also like that despite being a movie that is in your face like that, it still does a lot of subtle character stuff that you could easily miss if you weren't paying attention. So there's subtlety here, but it's caked over by all this like just crazy insanity and just like these over-the-top villain speeches and things like that kind of remind me of like 90s slashers, but done a little bit better here than most of those. And of course, it almost goes without saying, but my fourth thing I really like about this movie is that it's not just the first Black Christmas all over again. It's a very different scenario, so it's going to play out way differently than the first movie did, so I'm not just sitting there waiting for, oh, now that scene's got to happen. Oh, now that scene's going to happen. Okay, and now we're just going to have the same outcomes as we did before. Which was a big problem with the original remake, except that one added a lot more backstory that was just completely unnecessary. And while this one does have a lot of backstory, it's a lot more necessary in this instance. Which leads me to my fifth thing I really liked about this movie, is that despite the fact that it's a very different scenario, I still liked the little nods to the original movie that they inserted throughout. Like there's a scene in which a character is searching for a cat, much like how in the original movie there was the house mom was looking for a cat before Billy got her. And in this movie there's another character who's searching for a cat in a very similar scenario, but it plays out a little differently. Alright, so now that I've talked about the good things, let me take a minute to talk about the things that I feel like don't quite work with this movie. The first thing that doesn't work about the movie is probably going to be my most controversial opinion about the movie, and that's this. I do not think the PG-13 rating cut worked. I think it was a huge mistake, because the end result in the movie is that you can totally tell how they cut a lot of little bits out of the movie, and it's created this weird pacing issue in which the movie moves way too fast, and there are pieces that feel like they're actually missing in the final product. Like, you have scenarios in which characters are doing like these long, like dramatic, like walking towards a corpse that you know is going to spin around so you can see the dead body, but you don't see the dead body, and it kind of cuts away and it feels like, wait, that was it? All that suspense and build up to just a cutaway? That's kind of lame, guys. And on top of that, this movie doesn't feel like it was actually made for a younger female demographic. Every frame of it screams adults and college kids. In fact, R-rated movies like Tragedy Girls and Ginger Snaps feel way more targeted at that group than this movie does. This movie just has so much stuff throughout it that feels 100% like mature as fuck. And, a lot of those things it takes incredibly seriously, and there are little things they probably could have done to make it feel more targeted at that. Like, for example, had they had way more of the girls kicking ass in the last half of the movie, I feel like that could have made it feel way more like a movie targeted at that demographic, which leads me into my second criticism of the movie, and that's this. A huge chunk of the marketing for this movie was the girls standing like badass in those posters, and a whole bunch of trailers that made it out like, okay, so while this like fraternity of like killers is going after all these women, they're going to get their own. These women are going to kick their asses in the end. And I feel like the movie didn't deliver enough of that by the end of the movie. Like, by the time that starts, you're already in the end of the last act. And I feel like since you spent most of the marketing on that, that should have at least been like the second half of the movie just completely. I guess what I'm trying to say is I kind of wanted, based on the marketing of this movie, a little bit more of that you're next badassery. Because that movie did a damn good job of having a character just completely take it to the killers throughout the entire running time, while still having a bunch of suspense and a bunch of thrills and some really great scares. As well as some really off-the-wall humor. Now, my third criticism of the movie is the one I'm most hesitant to make, because it's entirely possible I might have missed something, but I feel there were a couple, like, plot holes in the film, like some moments in which characters did things, and I wasn't entirely sure how the characters knew to do that, if that makes sense. I'm trying to vague my way through that without getting too spoilery, but Again, it's entirely possible that if I rewatched the movie, I might have actually missed little details in like the dialogue or in like certain scenes. Like there might have been someone lurking in the background that I missed that might explain why certain characters knew certain things when they did. So yeah, those were my problems with the movie and the things that I felt kept this movie from being truly great. But that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy myself. I 100% enjoyed myself throughout this movie. There's a lot of really fun moments. There's a lot of really good scares and creepy moments. None of them, I think, are on par with the suspense and the fear that I felt while watching the first movie. But then again, I watched that movie a really long time ago when I was a kid, so maybe if I was a kid, I would feel that way about this one. Again, I said this in a previous blog, but my girlfriend felt that this movie was pretty fucking scary, so obviously it was working for her, and she would be way more the target demographic for this movie than I would be, so hey, take my words with a grain of salt when it comes to this movie's scariness. Anyway, long story short, despite my criticisms, I still 100% recommend this movie, and if I haven't convinced you to go check it out despite all of its problems, then stay tuned for my spoiler section, because I'm going to go a little bit more in depth to what this movie was actually saying, a little more analytical, so to speak. So stay tuned for that. And as per usual, when this movie hits Amazon, I'm going to include an Amazon affiliate link in the description below, so if you're watching this way after the movie has come out, like deep into 2020, for example, then check out the description and click that link, and if you click that link and buy or rent the movie using that link, I will get a kickback from it. And with that all said, let us finally move on to the spoilers. Alright, so big spoilers here. Whereas the original Black Christmas was about a single killer infiltrating a sorority house and killing off the sorority sisters one by one, this movie is about a killer fraternity that is picking off the sorority sisters one by one, much like the original movie, but for different reasons, let's just say. Essentially, they're a misogynist cult of He-Man woman haters who have decided to take it upon themselves to punish all the bad women, the women that are challenging the system. And here's the thing about this plot. Despite the fact that this movie is not subtle in the slightest, I've noticed a whole bunch of people have completely misinterpreted the message and the meaning of this movie. So allow me to break it down for you in very simple terms. Literally in the movie, the reason why this cult/fraternity is doing this is because both the college and their fraternity was founded by a black magic sorcerer who hated women and wanted men to establish dominance over women. Essentially, a patriarchal sorcerer. And the way this sorcerer sought to do this is by both establishing a system and by establishing a magic curse that would infect the men in this fraternity and essentially weed out all the femininity from them and just replace it with pure aggression, testosterone, and all the worst toxic male behaviors. Now that's literally what's happening in the movie, but metaphorically, what the movie is trying to say and what it is demonstrating is how in real life, these systems, like colleges and fraternities, have this habit of breeding the most toxic behavior out of people, even if they are at their core good people. It's that thing where you are part of society as a whole, so there is no way that you're not going to be influenced by all the influencing forces in society. So you might be a good person who actually has compassion and care about people, but society might either slowly weed that out of you by, beating you down constantly, or you might find yourself, without realizing it, being influenced by toxic ideas, and you might find yourself spouting those ideas, not realizing how bad they are because that's just the way everyone says you should.
That's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well so far.
Because tradition, it's always been that way. We've always said it's done that way, so that's the way it is, right? Except that's not always true. Sometimes that tradition is actually a really bad thing and is perpetuating some really bad ideas that we should probably not do anymore. People are having a hard time grasping it, because a lot of people saw this movie and took it to mean like, oh, well, clearly this movie is saying that all men are evil, except it's not. There are characters like Landon, for example, that are categorically not evil, but even they end up finding themselves under the influence of the spell. But as the movie establishes, if they will themselves out of that, if they become aware of the influence of the spell, they can break themselves out of it, which Landon does in the movie. And so by the end of the movie, Landon is helping the girls defeat the cult, or in other words, smash the patriarchy. Now, I will admit, one thing I don't think the movie actually tackles at all, and probably should have tackled at least a little bit, is how much these systems, like fraternities, are also, like, highly class-based. Because chances are, if you're in one of these Ivy League colleges, in one of these big fraternities, you're a rich motherfucker and not necessarily a poor motherfucker. But that doesn't mean that poor people aren't influenced by these ideas. They often are. It's how you get people that end up voting against their best interests. It happens all the time. So yeah, if you can't tell, I'm having a hard time like articulating this, but hopefully what I've been saying makes sense. All right, now that I got that out of the way, let me talk a little bit about one of the plot holes in the movie, or at least it might be a plot hole. I might have missed something, and if I did, then it's not. But if I didn't miss anything, then there's a point in the movie in which the main character, is going to go destroy the statue, which is where the source of the curse that the sorcerer put on the fraternity. And the bad guys set up this trap in which they have one of the characters who she cares about trapped in another room and screaming for her. And it's weird because the only way I can see that they would set up this trap is if they know that she knows about the statue, except at this point, she's told no one except for her best friend in the car the scene right before this. So I have no idea how the fraternity knew that A, she knew about the statue, and B, that she was going to go destroy the statue and knew that it was the source of the curse, and C, that they knew she was going to do that at that exact moment during all the chaos. Like, there's a lot of things that had to coalesce into that moment for them to set up that very specific trap that only could have been a trap for her because it's a character that she specifically cares about for a very specific reason. So, I don't know. I feel like there might have been something in the movie that I missed, but if I didn't, that just kind of stuck out to me as this weird, like, I guess the fraternity are psychic? I don't know. So, for most people, it's probably not going to be a problem, but it stuck out to me. Anyway, my fellow Gorehounds, I am all talked out of Black Christmas, so as per usual, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And if you're feeling especially generous and want to help me keep my roof over my head, then be sure to check out my Patreon page, and if you decide to go the Patreon route, know that even $1 a month can go a long way. And with that all said, my fellow Gorehounds, I'm going to go work on some more Blood Splattered Cinema episodes and some Blood Splattered catch-up vlogs, and I'ma catch y'all later.